Hi, everyone. My name is Kyle Weber, and I'm very happy today to be moderating the panel on surviving disruption, how to rethink transportation and get it off the ground. We've got a really great panel of experts and people very knowledgeable about the industry. And so just to kind of quickly jump into it, I'm going to introduce myself and then the rest of the panelists, and then we can go straight to the questions. So my name is Kyle Weber again. I have been working in the UAE for about 10 years and specifically in the transportation sector for about 4. I'm the managing partner of Leave Earth a Future, and our flagship project is called EV Lab. So we're working on trying to get electric vehicles into the mainstream. All right, I'm happy to introduce our first speaker. I'll introduce everyone and then we can kind of jump into the questions. So Daniel, who's the managing director of AV Living Lab. He's the founder and the CEO, focused on bringing autonomous mobility and making life easier and more productive. Daniel has been working as an external digital transformation leader and an account manager at Cisco. Our second speaker is Didier Chaubad. He's a professor of management sciences at IAE Paris, the Sorbonne Business School, and as a professor has been working in entrepreneurship and innovation. Didier has been working mainly on venturing processes, creating teams, social networks, business support, on strategy and institutional culture and entrepreneurship. Welcome, Didier. Suhaila Ufata, she's the managing director of BMW I Ventures in Europe and the director of platform at BMW I Ventures. So she invests in cutting edge solutions, focusing on BMW's current and future businesses in technology and customer and service space. In addition to the investment activities, Suhaila works closely with their portfolio companies. And in her role as director, she develops and implements strategic growth initiatives and provides operational support to these companies. Welcome. We also have Anton Skibin, who's the acceleration director at 150 plus energy and transportation startups at Skolkovo, I think I got that right, Foundation. Anton, so he's a specialist. He has a specialist degree in applied mathematics and cybernetics, a PhD in R&D, project management from Moscow University, and has about 20 years experience working in energy consultation. So welcome, Anton. Finally, we have Florence, last but not least, Florence Verzelen, who is the Executive Vice President in charge of Industry Marketing and Sustainability at Dassault Systems. So she's been, which is the 3D experience company. With more than 15 years in the private and public sector, Florence has been nominated for Woman of the Year, as well as Young Leader in the French American Foundation and Young Global Leader of the World Economic Forum. So again, welcome everyone. Very happy to have you here on this panel today. Mainly what we're going to be talking about has to do with, so obviously the topic is disruption in transportation. I kind of want to jump into the questions, then we can kind of, I'll allow you guys to talk as we discuss. My first question, actually, I think I want to start with you, Florence. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you do and how a large corporation like Dassault Systems prepares for transportation disruption.
Definitely. Thank you very much for asking, Kyle, and I'm very happy to be with such a panel today. What does Dassault Systèmes do in transportation? We are basically in 95% of the car in this planet. And what we do is to provide software that allow to innovate, design, simulate, manufacture, and do the marketing and the life cycle of the cars on our platform, 3D Experience platform. We've been working in the transportation industry since 30 years. So what does it mean for us, disruption in transportation? Well, what we see is that the transportation industry is going towards huge changes, and these changes is bringing the transportation industry to become more resilient, more sustainable, more innovative. And in order to do that, they need to find new solutions, develop new programs, electric vehicle, autonomous vehicle, but also link with the city in order for the autonomous vehicle to find the right place in the city. So what they need is, in fact, research, system of system approach, and as fast as possible, try new project development. So this is what we pretend by creating the software that empower this revolution. And this is for really innovation on autonomous and electric. Second thing on sustainability. Sustainability is key because right now there are more and more constraints in terms of CO2 emission, in terms of ultimately zero net emission for the car, including manufacturing. And what our software provides is the intelligence that allows to write any decision, to know the impact of any decision on the materials you're going to use and the CO2 you're going to emit. Not only when you produce, but along the whole life cycle assessment. And to propose better alternatives powered by artificial intelligence, like, for example, generative design. And this is going to be key if we really want to go net zero emission for the full life cycle assessment. And for the last challenge of the industry, resilience, especially important today because of the topic of resilience of the supply chain. A lot of factories have to close during COVID because their supply chain was not resilient. What we provide to the company we're working with is a full modelization of their supply chain in order to identify the weak point and find as soon as possible the best alternative possible in order to build a resilient supply chain compared to the supply chain of 2019 or 2018 that were built on just in time and no stock. Here we are talking resilient supply chain to ensure a continuous production. So that's what we do at Dassault System to allow the disruption to happen in this very important industry.
Okay, great. So maybe I'll ask you one more question, and then I think it's a great segue into kind of a larger topic, which is why, first of all, how do we consider sustainability when we talk about disruption? And so why is it important in your opinion?
For me, sustainability is a catalyst and enabler of the disruption. It was the first reason why there is a disruption in transportation industry. You all know about climate change, about the impact on the world, the fact that we have to reduce the emission. Transportation industry has been one of the first to be asked to do so. And this is because we have that challenge that we are fostering research in electrification, in hydrogen motorization, in a lot of things. And we are not only doing that for the motor, now we're really working on the full sustainable life cycle of the transportation. So for me, it's the beginning of the disruption, sustainability. And it's also the beginning of the disruption, not only of the transportation industry, but of the full ecosystem. Because what sustainability is needed not only in this industry, in all industry and in cities. And the way the autonomous and electric car or the autonomous and net zero emission car is going to interact with the city is going to have an impact on how the city, on the CO2 emission of the city. So it's the beginning of a big movement. So it's going to be super interesting in the years to come.
Great, thanks so much. So maybe with that, I'll go over to Anton. Anton, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how an entity like Skolkovo Foundation plays an important role in bringing together startups, large corporations, and governments.
Yes, Kylie, thank you. So the Skolkovo project was launched about 10 years ago in Moscow, in Russia. And initially it was an idea of building the infrastructure for innovations, for startups, for R&D activities. But actually, now we clearly understand that this innovation activities, they can grow in a kind of ecosystem. So currently, Skolkovo project is the ecosystem that cooperates different entities, like about 2,500 startups, 150 corporate partners, and the postdoc international universities called TEC. So we clearly understand that the life cycle of innovation, of disruptive technology, have to be connected with startups, with developers, corporate partners that implement these innovations or develop their own innovations, government, to bring actual legislations and actual rules in activities in the country, and also universities that can develop new kind of innovative ideas or disruptive topics for further growth of a new spin-off startups, etc. So we believe that only in these cooperations of these particles, all the cycle of new project development or new disruptive technologies implementation can be reached. So currently, Skolkovo project, it's the ecosystem, and also it's the ecosystem that encourages startups, developers, youngsters, and corporations to develop some disruptive points in current activities, but also it's the various support means for this innovative projects, like financial means, like I've mentioned some connections with the government to move rules and legislations forward. And also a very important part of our activities is like acceleration, as I've mentioned, when we support startups to grow faster, to reach the market, and not to, not to die in this gaps of lack of investments or a lack of competitiveness, maybe. So, yeah. Okay.
Well, yeah, so that's great. So maybe you can, from your perspective, because we were talking about sustainability, do you think that the transportation industry and sustainability are kind of inherently at odds? Do you think there's a nice place where they can come together? How does sustainability play a key role in what Skolkovo is doing?
Okay, first of all, I think Florence mentioned it. It's very important that sustainability and ecological issues became like a starting point for most of the disruptive ideas that flow in different areas now. In transportation, first of all. Actually, I work in the cluster that is called ecotech. So from the start of the Skolkovo project, this ecotech concept was like one of the main milestones. And in transportation sector that I work with for about 10 years by now, ecological issues are the real driver to change all, starting from components of vehicles like batteries, hydrogen, zero emission technologies, but also changing the whole logistics, passenger models in the cities, like transportation ideas. So we, for about 10 years, in different cooperations with our partners, industrial partners, we launched a number of acceleration programs for different topics, like for transportation, like for vehicles, advanced batteries to face new electric vehicle models. The challenge for EV infrastructure. So to find a number of startups that can develop and bring to the market new future models for EV charging infrastructure. And currently we are working on a huge ecological program that involves a number of our partners, global partners, EDF, Enel, Total, also Russian companies. They are so different. Some of them are oil and gas companies, some of them are energy companies. But sometimes all of these different corporations are focused, are gathered by the ideas of ecology, and one of the ideas, one of the topics is transportation. So oil and gas companies that change their activities, and like Total oil and gas company, they mentioned that carbon fuel is not the future, probably. So they are interested in hydrogen technologies, EV technologies. Energy companies like Enel, EDF, they are already there. They are already working with the electricity transport vehicles. Steel companies that we work with, they are influenced by the changes in the vehicle production markets. So all different players on the market are open to the innovation community, and the startups that are applied in this acceleration programs, they are involved and they support with their technology projects and ideas. So
Okay, great.
Sustainability, environments, innovations, they are all clear together.
Yeah. Well, that's perfect, because perfect, again, segue to the next person I was going to ask a few questions to. So Suhaila, from BMW I Ventures is a VC, I think very well known in the transportation community. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about where we're at right now in terms of the current situation, what kind of interesting investment opportunities there are available, and just give us a little insight into the current market.
Sure, Kyle, love to. So for the ones that might not know us, let me just give a brief introduction to who we are and what we do. So we are the venture capital arm of the BMW Group. I'm leading our European division, and we're a 500 million euro venture capital arm. We have over 50 investments in the future of mobility space, autonomous driving, electrification, but all of the sustainable layers of this ecosystem as well are sort of our sweet spot. This is where we're investing. We're headquartered in Silicon Valley, and the European team is based out of Munich, where the heart of the automotive ecosystem in Germany is based. So when we look at the current development, there's a lot of interesting movements that we see. On one hand, I'd like to describe that within sort of a larger framework. So the entire ESG alignment framework, E standing for environmental, S for social, and G for governance, we've seen a shift in the entire financial industry that has, trended up in the last years, where organizations that are not steered according to those three dimensions, are being evaluated less valuable because there's a certain risk that they will be successful in the future. And what we're seeing right now, that this is also hitting the venture capital scene as one of the smallest asset class, and specifically the mobility space. Why is that? There are a number of reasons. On one hand side, the pandemic has shown us that our societies and our ecosystems aren't as resilient as we thought of, just as Florence has mentioned in her input before. And we also see that sort of there's a rethinking. People just stopped and paused and thought about, okay, how's the future going to look like? People started to work from home. So the standard commute from home to work daily is, for most of us, not just how we start our day anymore. So people started to rethink, if you then look into the public transportation space, a ton of people stopped driving the metro, obviously for, the obvious health risks, which were concerned at the very beginning when the metros weren't cleaned properly and so on. So you see that the mobility patterns are inherently changing, and yet at the same time, innovation and money that has been pulled into the transformation of the urban environment is increasing. And that is an opportunity in itself, because wherever there is disruption, there's also an opportunity. So we'll definitely see in the smart city ecosystem take up. This has been a trend. This has been sort of out there for years, and people are waiting for the cool startups to pick up. I've never made an investment in that space because reach is a problem. While we have a couple of cities that are very progressive, Dubai obviously is one of them, Singapore as well, we have a lot of other ecosystems where these technologies can scale. What I'm predicting for the future is, given that for smart city operations to actually finally take off. That is just one area. We will also see, a lot of around mobility patterns I've mentioned before. We will see two spectrums. One spectrum is the super premium luxury high-end spectrum, where we will see people in the future being more open to being, just transported from A to B, maybe in a very luxurious autonomous driving pod. We're still quite far away from getting full autonomy in the urban environment, but we will see business models arising in that space. We also will see that there will be more clear evidence that shared mobility offerings will continue to struggle based on the cost structure, but also based on the fact that a lot of people are just not willing to use them anymore. And that is the perfect combination, because at the very end, these business models will work a lot more in a fleet context rather than in a one-person context. And then at the lower spectrum, what we see, and this is very unfair, we will see that more and more people, specifically in ecosystems like take the US, for example, unemployment rates are rising through the roofs. A lot of people cannot afford to buy a car anymore. So there will be new business models around used car ownership models, platforms, where people who are sort of, looking for individual forms of mobility will sort of, approach this type of modality instead of just buying their own car, which they might have done in the past. So this is a divergence which you see on the top end luxury segment and on the lower end more economical segment. That's quite interesting. And then to sum up in the micromobility context, this is really interesting because at the beginning of the pandemic, people were like, oh no, I'm not taking my Lime anymore. I'm not taking my Bird, whatever. I'm invested in Lime. So just for full transparency. And because people were just concerned. But now, after sort of the lockdown stopped and people started to move around a lot, there are people that are saying, okay, I might have used in my London, New York metropolitan environment in the past tube or the metro, but now I'm looking for individual mobility. So to make these business cases successful, obviously they need to be cleaned, it needs to be hygienic, to use them. But these are just a couple of trends and dynamics that I wanted to describe.
That's great. Thanks so much for giving us that great sort of review. Maybe you can just give some of your thoughts on what kind of, what do you see as something that's investable? How do you vet or evaluate if one of these new mobility disruptions is actually happening and real, or if it's just a bunch of hype? Any thoughts that you might be able to share?
I mean, venture capital is all about taking certain risks, but unless other investors think, this is not about saying yes and pleasing people. This is about saying no to a lot of business models, because there are actually very few that can take off. So within this context, we touched upon, and Florence and Anton both have mentioned the sustainability movement in the mobility ecosystem. This is a mega trend. So think of all of the companies you personally are aware of that have pledged publicly their CO2 emission targets, 2030, 2050, and so on. These companies will have to change in terms of who they're working with, the technologies they integrate in their supply chain or in their production processes. So all of the companies that are sort of focusing in that space, and that's not just mobility, so personal mobility in particular, but I'm talking about the wider ecosystem, will definitely find a lot of very desperate customers that are looking to apply their technologies. For every business out there, it still applies. Your technology has to be better than the incumbent technology. Ideally, it should be much cheaper. It should be, just available to drop into existing processes, because people will not change massively in terms of how they're producing a product, for example. It's just too complex, and then ideally should have a better performance. That sounds just all too perfect, but this is basically what is the same for a sustainable mobility offering or any other offering out there. But the difference is that the demand and the need out there is massive. And there are a lot of other trends that tie into this. For example, the reduced price for energy, for renewable energy that actually, tags onto the CO2, to the carbon footprint of these types of technologies. So this is really interesting. But at the same time, I think it is absolutely unreasonable to believe that ecosystems are just going to change just like that. Also, the smart mobility ecosystem that I've mentioned before for the cities. I mean, yes, it's great to have governmental customers, but sales cycles are super long. And in addition to that, cities have to deal with a pandemic. So they might need to spend money on education or on health concern topics. So people shouldn't be over crazy, when it comes to looking at the opportunities, but just real business focus on what is big enough to scale. Where is your a market? Where is product market fit for the new technologies? And in the sustainable mobility context, there is a massive change. I want to add also that we will see a massive shift on the social side, because after the pandemic, after we have all seen what happens to our societies, there's going to be a huge consumer trend that, focuses on social matters. We see the young people marching on the streets for social justice and so on and so on. So everyone who's actually, you don't need to be a VC, you just need to watch the big trends, what's happening. And then the same rules as for any other venture capital backed company apply also for the sustainable space. So it is a very interesting time where a lot of different things are happening at the same time. And if any of the sustainable mobility entrepreneurs are watching this right now, this is the time to fund and start your business.
Great. Thank you so much. That's amazing insight. I love it. You mentioned something really key, which is the social side. And that's something that I was hoping that our next panelists could actually go into a little more detail on. So Didier, maybe you can tell us a little bit from the academic perspective. How are we preparing these future leaders of disruption to deal with this changing world that we now live in?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Kyle. It's very, and first I would like to start by, each of the former panelists have really emphasized the drastic changes we are knowing, and insisting on technology, insisting on the ecosystem, on the change in social dimension, and all these elements have changed very importantly the industry and the transportation industry. And it's clear that disruption is probably a very key issue for this industry. So, we have said, okay, that there are some elements regarding technology, some elements regarding society dimension, regarding just thinking society dimension, we mustn't forget all the issues with climate, for instance, and all these elements, social issues also, issues regarding cities, and what are becoming, for instance, smart cities in the context of post-COVID, for instance. And also we have insisted on business models and the new possibilities, new opportunities on the market. And when we are thinking of academics, as scholars, we are working on all these changes, trying to understand them and working with very diverse partners from firms, from science, in order to tackle with these issues. But you're right, Kyle, saying that the issue is now how can we train people to address all these issues? And it seems to me that, I'm in Sorbonne Business School, and Sorbonne Business School is quite special regarding the French business schools, because the vast majority of our students are executives. So all the people have generally 10 years experience before coming with us. And generally, and also a majority of them are engineers. So we have quite a special mix between engineers, managers, people that come from abroad and from France. And really the issue is to say, okay, what do they want? They mainly want to be able to evolve in their career. And so we have to try to help them in mastering, in knowing all the issues we are knowing. And so finally, the main issue for us is to really to change the way we are making learning and education, because the point is no more to train classically students, saying, making, for instance, in France, we like the ex-cathedra professor saying, oh, here is the truth, and all the students listening and using the pen in order to say, okay, what is good? And really, we have changed our minds, saying, okay, we have to make active learning, reverse learning, saying, okay, we have to challenge our students with all these changes and to propose them some tools that enable them to think about the new issues. So, the point is really to put the students at the center of the learning process and saying, okay, to be at the center of the learning process, what is it? It is to work by group. So we make some teams of students and we give them some real projects to do. Saying, okay, you have to make some innovations, you have to think about new issues, new business models, and so on. And so we try to challenge them in order to be able to answer and to evolve in their way of analyzing the things. So, it's quite a different philosophy. And if we go further, what do we observe? We observe quite, I would say, a mix of tools. Because, okay, we give them a lot of things to prepare before the teaching, before the seminars. And so generally, when we have them, either by webinar, distance learning, or in classroom, we propose them to work on projects and to mobilize what they have learned and to try to address challenges. For instance, we will organize some innovation days, some hackathon, so they will have to work on projects and to propose some solutions. And so we will guide them in order to analyze the problem. Okay, we generally are thinking about, we generally speak about design thinking, lean startup, some creativity methods, for instance. And the way will be, okay, we give them the tools and we want them to try to work on real situations in order to analyze and to propose solutions. And generally, we will also imagine both mentoring, working with them, challenging them as professors, and also we will arrange some connections with professionals. Connections with professionals are generally double. Sometimes we propose to professionals to propose the topic. For instance, we will have an innovation day on the new innovation on smart cities and the modification of the city in a post-COVID era and what is its impact on the way we are making transportation, mobility, what Soela was explaining. So we will try to focus them on this problem and we will say, okay, what are you able to do You have you have an entrepreneur that gives you the question, and you have to work on the very short time with seminar, and after we will give them time to construct their projects by interactions with the diverse stakeholders. So you see, I am able to add a lot of things on that, but I think the main point is really to say that people, by group, by teams, they really are at the center of the learning process, and our role is really to provide them tools and that enable them to think, to analyze, and to make some propositions. And professionals will challenge them at the beginning, and sometimes very frequently also at the end, because we will make some jury with people, sometimes from some VCs, some professionals, that will say, okay, is really your solution, is it an interesting one, and so on. So, here is probably the main change, saying, okay, we are not able to train people, students, as we were doing, I would say, 10 years ago. Okay.
That's great.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you so much. No, this is perfect. This is exactly what we kind of all need to hear, I think, is that, the almost hands-on approach to learning, which is so key these days, really, to making sure that everyone understands the full ecosystem and you're not just looking at a small piece of the puzzle. Well, with that being said, maybe I'll move on to our last but not least panelist, which is Daniel. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the projects that you've been working on, and we can start from there. I'll leave it open-ended right now for you.
Okay, thank you. So basically, AV Living Lab is a privately owned test bed for autonomous and connected vehicles. And mainly we work with large OEMs and high-tech companies. So what we did in the last 2 years is we did 30 plus pilots. And we are working with Google from Silicon Valley to European OEMs like Daimler, Volkswagen, also international like Toyota and Magna. And what we are doing is we are using our test bed, and together with citizens and visitors, so per year we have 21 million visitors in our living lab, which is huge. It has 8 kilometers of road, 8,500 parking spaces, 450 shops, 70 restaurants, a lot of business, commercial areas, and it's privately owned. But I would really like to talk more about EV regulation in Europe. So the point, what we see is that we all know that we have from level 0, which is no automation, to level 5, which is full automation. We have those levels. And level 1, which is, let's say, driver assistance, it is fully legal on all public roads in Europe. So what we are talking about regulation is how to regulate level 4, which is high automation, and level 5, which is full automation. Now, we need to understand that in Europe, in each country, we have some kind of ecosystem or cluster of all stakeholders, which is government, cities, academia, industry, and NGOs. And in Slovenia, it's built around AV Living Lab. In Austria, it's Graz region. In Italy, it's where the Modena city, University of Modena, Maserati, Turin. In France, it's in Paris Technopark, where the Vedacom. In Italy, it's around Barcelona. And of course, I can go on and on and on countries. But I would like to highlight maybe more like Germany. So in Germany, they work closely with universities like Technical University of Munich and BMW, then Ingolstadt with Audi, Stuttgart with Graz, but also with industry partners. So we know that Port of Hamburg is a huge test bed for autonomous vehicle solutions. And how to connect the dots, European Commission also has launched many years ago Horizon 2020 projects where multiple stakeholders are joining. And the topics are so many, from public acceptance, driving behavior, for 5G, how this will work. Even there are cross-border partnerships. For example, Austria, Hungary, and Slovenia, we have cross-border autonomous driving partnership, mainly focusing on harmonization of different national legislations. So in Austria, there are certain set of rules for autonomous driving. Let's say level 2, preparing for level 3, and then you're entering another country. So how it's with marking, with public acceptance, with all of this harmonization. So then what we see also related to the development and research work are different types of autonomous vehicles and use cases. So mainly we think about cars or shuttles, but also there are truck platooning projects going on, so many. There are different startups building up and different players are. So what we are talking is 100 plus entities working on developing autonomous driving capabilities. And if I was now a couple of times in the Munich, where BMW has autonomous driving campus, they have 100 plus vehicles going around, capturing the real life data and improving the solutions. And they are building partnerships with different ecosystems. But also in Stuttgart, Daimler is building partnership, let's say with Bosch and internally. And then Audi, they set up the company called Autonomous Intelligent Driving. Now they merged it with Argo AI to fight. And basically what we see is on so many levels this is happening. Why this is important? Because government are learning from all these examples to create rules, which of course public acceptance will be key. And now to summarize my view on autonomous driving legislation, there will be stages. Everything is starting already, is going on in simulation, in digital twin environment. Then it's going to closed beds, let's say test beds. Then to highways. On highways, we quite have a lot of successes and best practices. But the last part, urban environment, that one will be really difficult and challenging to master. There are so many unusual and unpredictable situations, so that internally we are discussing that maybe faster will happen in urban air mobility space than on the road. And all these levels are coming to in certain point of time together. So it will be interesting to see next 10 years.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, thanks so much. Okay, the next question I kind of wanted to just quickly go through with you is about responsibility. So with an autonomous vehicle, it's always a question of, there's these sort of paradox questions, right, that come up. Will the vehicle, crash into an empty field or into the ocean, or how does this work? And so anyway, maybe you could just kind of talk a little bit about responsibility, both for the rider, the person who's jumping in one of these vehicles, and from maybe a company or legislation perspective. Yeah.
So this is one of the most important question is how to make it secure and safe for all involved in the mobility space. And each countries are learning from each other, and there is a lot of research works. So right now, to have a pilot in a country, you need to nominate and get approval, and of course, who will cover, the liability and this kind of, and this depends from countries to countries. I need to highlight that in 2018, all European member states have signed the agreement to promote large-scale pilots, and they are learning from them. So we don't have all the answers. For some, they are going that the provider will be responsible. For some, they want to have driver, partial. I think that still research works are ongoing. And in Europe, we don't promote our work until we are done. So you will see a lot of work is going on below the radar. A lot of working groups are there. A lot of exchange of insights is going on at this stage. But what we will see is when we will have final conclusion.
Okay, awesome. The last thing I wanted to ask you, and maybe this is more close to home for me, is when do you think we'll see flying autonomous vehicles in Dubai?
Okay, so the urban air mobility is not a new thing, what some people are thinking. It started, in 60s with helicopters, and which are quite loud and noisy and expensive to operate. And over the year of the time, with emerging technologies like distributed propulsion, electric propulsion, basically it's becoming more and more a reality. A lot of startups are working on them. We have more than 300 designs out there, and cities are looking how to introduce this moving in third dimension in cities, especially in mega cities. So if I look in, let's say, example of Dubai, to build a highway, a kilometer of highway in UAE, there I saw some information. It's needed $1 million per kilometer. To build a metro, it's 100 million, and Hyperloop is 40 million per kilometer. So Abu Dhabi, Dubai, it is around 6 billion project. And the question is, can especially emerging market, where the hugest growth of mega cities will happen in near future, can afford that to build the infrastructure, or there are other solutions? So obviously, urban air mobility could be a solution, but they need to be safe and secure. And right now, we don't have not even, okay, so we have for in military space with Bell, and in civil Leonardo, we have two models that are vertical takeoff and landing. But what we are looking for is a massive adoption of it. So cities, I believe there are two ways to approach that. One will be a national legislation, like for in Europe, this is EASA, European Aviation Safety Agency, that will create rules for all European member states. And another one will be city-driven, where the city of Dubai, together with the government of Dubai, the RTA, can create an exception or certain set of rules when one route can be regulated. Maybe not overpopulated area. Maybe, you know, you go about the sea or a desert. But the thing is that cities will, so country to country will be different. And what I see is that Dubai is working really hard with, let's say, 2 or 3 VTOL developers to make it happen. And I believe that in the beginning will be this air shuttle, so fixed route between A and B location, not air taxi, you know, jumping from sky roof to another. And what we see is that I believe that the race is on, which city will be the first one, and could be that by 2025, Dubai could be one of the first cities to do that. But it's challenging because technology will have certain limitations, and I know that all involved will make a wise decision to make it safe and secure for all, and I'm looking forward to also do a first test flight.
And let me add up
Amazing.
here, because I cannot let this go without mentioning that 2 of the leading startups in this space are actually from Germany. So you all probably know Lilium and Volocopter. So yes, the race is on. Daniel said a ton of super smart things, which are very, very true. They will happen. And the startup ecosystem in Germany is so vivid. It's so interesting. There's so much happening. It's actually quite cool. You don't always have to look to Silicon Valley or to other spaces. Great ecosystems too, but there's lots of happening and movement here too.
Yes, just to comment that, the race is also on patents. So for Europe is important that for autonomous driving and connected and shared and electric, there is a lot of patents submitted, and Europe is taking a lead. And related to urban air mobility, Europe is very, very active. EASA is very, very active. Ecosystems are very, very active. And what was mentioned, Volocopter already started promotional pre-reservation of a ticket, which is around 300 euros. And Lilium is doing a great job. They are former students from Technical University of Munich. They got great funding, and there will be more great stories coming from them in the future.
Great. So we have a few we have a few minutes left, about 10 minutes. I kind of wanted to open it up to everyone just to kind of give their thoughts on what has been discussed. So just to kind of review, we talked a lot about the social side being important, the importance of collaboration and cooperation, of resilience in the supply chain, shared mobility, micro-mobility, VTOL. So maybe if Florence, if you had any comments or thoughts that you wanted to share after hearing all this, maybe you could tell us a little bit about, just anything you have to share.
Thank you. First, it's an amazing panel, and congratulations to all the speakers. On the eVTOL, I agree with Daniel and Suela's technology is there. It's actually working right now. I've been in eVTOL and in autonomous air transportation. It's working, but we have two problems, and Daniel was very clear on that as well. The first one is the cost. How do we scale up? And the second one is a regulation. And Daniel, you mentioned two types of regulation, either national or city level. I believe a lot more in city, because city have a lot of challenges to tackle. Silicon Valley is working on that, but also China, some mega city in China, Middle East, and they're going to be the ones that need to unlock that, because if they want to continue to attract people, citizens in the city, they have to find a way to create sustainable transportation, and by sustainable, I mean net zero emission, but also affordable for people. You cannot spend 2 hours to go from A to B in Moscow, for example. I've been doing that in the past, and there are different ways. So I'm super confident on eVTOL. And once we have figured out what are going to be the first cities that dare to go there.
Yes. Maybe just to add, in Europe, we have youth space program, which is combined from 42 European cities from 14 member states. And they are working on harmonization of the rules and regulation. And they are working closely with European Commission, so they are contributing to it. And the question is really how to manage the low altitude, let's say skyline, where there will be a lot of drones for cargo, air medical, surveillance, law enforcement, and so on, with passenger drones or VTOLs. So yeah, it will be a lot of work.
But what we are doing on autonomous cars is going to help. And you know, at the end of the day, what we've noticed working with transportation company and air mobility companies, it's less complex to do the simulation and to manage what is in the air. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot less things in the air than on the ground. So I'm super positive.
I would agree on the fact that there's a lot of intellectual property here in Europe. There's a lot of development, and that there is the fair will and reducing regulations. But then again, it's complex because there's so many states that have to find a compromise, which at the end, a compromise is not always the best for the course that you had in mind at the very beginning. So actually, since this is probably an audience from the MENA region, this region is so well prepared to sort of take a leading role in the future of mobility, as many ecosystems such as Dubai have already done for the last years. And it is all about finding responsible test beds. Obviously, security, responsibility for the society are key, but at the same time it's also about the speed. And this is in the tech era that we live in, always a criteria for success, because the first ones that will test out and that will have data sets that they can work with, that they can improve their algorithmic intelligence, these are the ones that have a competitive advantage, which is really hard to build up later on. So yes, agree and disagree at the same time.
Yeah. And also Sharjah Research Park could be some kind of sister living lab to what we do in Europe, and there can be exchange and transfer of knowledge and projects also. So that is why Sharjah is perfectly also positioned to become some kind of test bed for all these new future of mobility solutions.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. I mean, we're talking. A lot of us said Dubai, but I think we really, mean the UAE in general, and Sharjah, obviously, with the research park sponsoring this talk is really key, right? Because this is what we need to discuss, all these issues and how they really get resolved and sorted out. I just want to mention one thing, and then I'll leave it to you guys. We have about 5 minutes left. But so today is Tesla's battery day. If there's any interesting thoughts or any comments that anyone has on what predictions may be, on what might be coming out, please feel free to share. I have my own thoughts, but I'll open it up to everyone.
So just real quick, obviously, lithium battery prices are decreasing, and as the prices are decreasing, this is a great news for the entire EV space. I mean, that's an obvious no-brainer. There will be key competences that will need to be built up around battery technology. I do believe that this is an area which will grow in terms of traction, specifically also here in Germany. And then, we see this just happening on and on again. Just again, look at the renewable space. Prices have to decrease in order for technology to take up. That's just what's going to happen as well here. And here there is just a very strong marriage between electrification and autonomy, obviously with electrification rolling out quicker.
Maybe I could add up. So actually, I think that technology issues like high-tech innovations, they were the main topic like 5 years ago in terms of batteries and all different issues of mobility. But currently, more important is organizational innovations, like cooperation innovations, innovations in education process. So, of course, battery prices will go lower and lower, but it's not exponential. The exponential point of growth is based on different models of cooperation between vehicle users, vehicle producers, startups, communities, etc. So I hope we should focus on and just search in these topics of new models.
Didier, did you have anything to add?
I think I have perhaps missed some elements from Anton, but what was striking, I think, is really right, saying that in fact, problem is not a problem of technology. It's really a problem of ecosystem and a problem of organizational innovation and more largely of business models. How can we imagine new ways of doing things? For instance, if we take the idea of servitization, product service systems, the main point is that now, in only 10 years, we have to think that, for instance, in France, 10 years ago, people were buying 85% of cars. Now they are only buying 40% of cars, and I only speak of private customers, not of companies who are largely far away from this data. And so the point is that when we are thinking about autonomous electric vehicles, new ways of mobility, micromobility, so the point is really to think about the way we are able to develop new business model and attain scale up, and to be able to provide scale development for these new business models. And perhaps an additional point is that we have to be very attentive to social issues. We have mentioned the cities who are more and more involved in mobility and who are very crucial because we have to think that they are representing more than 70% of carbon emissions. And so are very important. And last, we mustn't forget the mix between companies, big companies and startups. We have with two elements. We have the global discussion between cooperation between big companies and startups, but also we have to think that our big companies now are more and more, they are international. And so they try to use the diverse environments, the diverse ecosystems in order to promote their global innovation. And so I think here there is probably an issue to look at. And for instance, look in France, we have a lot of pure players, startups that have been developed and have been bought by big companies. And sometimes the business models has been suppressed. Sometimes it has been a good way to buy the startup because it provides a way to have a scale up. So we mustn't forget these elements in order to discuss, I think.
I think it's a great point. Absolutely. I think we're about out of time. We have about 1 minute left. I just wanted to thank all of the panelists for attending, for giving their really valuable thoughts and feedback. And thank you all so much. Yeah, and if there's any final thoughts, please share with the group. But if not, it's okay too.
Thanks a lot.
Really appreciate everyone's time. Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye.